Feeling upset, I went speeding late at night, never expecting to get caught by my new wife, who works in public service. Embarrassed, I squatted in the corner of the traffic police station, head in my hands. Thankfully, she didn't seem to recognize me. She was just coldly writing out a penalty ticket nearby. I couldn't help but call out, "Wife?" The auxiliary officer nearby burst out laughing. "Well now, if I recall correctly, you're the 29th guy this month to call officer by wife." I was fucking speechless. Who the hell are these guys randomly calling her that? Is my wife someone you can just call wife? Makes me feel like I've been cuckolded. I glanced sideways at the wall calendar. It's only the beginning of the month. I've been married to Bai Ningbing for half a year. By my count, we've met a grand total of 3 times. The first time was for registering the marriage and our simple wedding ceremony. The second was for New Year's Eve dinner. And if you're asking about the third time, well, that's right now. The officer who administered the breathalyzer looked puzzled. "Strange, no alcohol detected. Why were you driving so fast?" Caught red-handed, I felt a bit guilty. My first time speeding, and I get nabbed. The reason was, well, I was feeling really down. To gain the sympathy of the male officers present and hopefully get lenient treatment, I put on a tearful, snotty display, lamenting, "What sin did I commit to deserve this?" My wife started cheating right after we got married. Staying out all night is the norm for her, and I have to hand over my salary so she can support some male college student. She's as passionate towards that student as she is cold towards me. Boo. The officers nearby were moved, filled with righteous indignation, turning into champions of justice. "That's outrageous. Where's your wife? We'll help you deal with that despicable pair." Whoosh, a small notebook came flying and hit the officer squarely on the back. A cold, crisp female voice rang out. "I told you to write tickets, not stand around gossiping." A chill went down my spine. Crap, that cold, stern voice sounds familiar. Following the voice, I looked up. A tall, long-legged beauty in uniform walked out of the office. Her face was expressionless but held an imposing aura, almost a carbon copy of the Medusa Queen from Chinese animation. She strode over quickly in her leather shoes. It felt like every step landed directly on my frantically beating heart. I subconsciously lowered my head and shrank back into the corner. Caught speeding tonight, I hadn't dared to call home. My only option was to notify my wife, who happens to be the deputy chief. I was also hoping her connections might lead to a lighter penalty. "Deputy Chief Bai, what brings you here?" Seeing my wife, Bai Ningbing, approach, the officer respectfully stepped forward to greet her. Bai Ningbing glanced at me, then turned to the officer. "His penalty form requires a family member's signature, correct? Where do I sign?" Taking the pad from the officer, Bai Ningbing began writing rapidly on it. I blinked up at her with my most innocent expression, but she didn't look at me once, filling out the form with an icy face. I thought she was only cold at home. I didn't expect her to be even colder in public. No, not just cold, this was utter indifference. Thankfully, I knew her well enough to understand this was just her nature. "Name?" my wife suddenly asked, throwing me for a loop. Considering the situation, I meekly gave my name, Yi Fan. She proceeded to ask for various personal details, including my home address and the reason for speeding. After a short while, Bai Ningbing put down her pen. I reached across the desk, gently tugged her sleeve, and murmured, "Wife?" Of the 3 staff members nearby, 2 choked on their water and 1 did spit take. Bai Ningbing didn't look at me. She picked up the form and walked toward the counter opposite. "Kid, you've got some serious nerve. Call her that out loud. But forget about it. Deputy Chief, Bai was appointed from above. She has a boundless future. Besides, like I said, 29 guys have called her wife this month already." Seeing that Bai Ningbing hadn't come over yet, the officer who had spoken earlier approached me and said in a low voice, "Believe it or not, our Chief Bai, with that face of hers, she draws a lot of attention, but she normally hates it when men try to cozy up to her for no reason." After speaking, he handed me a cigarette and lit it, advising, "Brother Yi Fan, don't blame me for not warning you. Watch your attitude. She's principled and incorruptible. She usually won't give you a hard time. As for wanting to be her husband, just dream about it. Don't say it out loud." Taking a deep drag from the cigarette, my rebellious streak instantly flared up. I took out a little red booklet from the car's armrest compartment, flipped it open with both hands, and shoved it right in front of the 3 officers. Look clearly, what is this? It's a marriage certificate. Your chief buys my wife. At first glance, the three saw it was just as I said. They snatched the marriage certificate and examined it closely from every angle. Their eyes were wide with shock, and gasps escaped their lips. Leaning against the doorframe with a cigarette dangling from my lips, I watched the astonished and envious expressions on the three men's faces. The one issuing the penalty notice is my wife. The one paying the fine and collecting me is also my wife. Just as I was reveling in my smugness, I suddenly felt the air temperature plummet. A figure emanating a powerful, oppressive aura approached. I quickly ducked my head, dropped the cigarette on the ground, and stubbed it out. Turning my head, my eyes met a pair of eyes shining like obsidian beneath long lashes. She slapped the printed document onto the desk, pointing to the bottom right corner. Signature. I asked meekly, whose name? Bai Ningbing's delicate eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she shot me a look that questioned my intelligence. Only then did I realize. I quickly picked up the pen and signed my name with flamboyant, confident strokes. Then, I carefully pushed the document and pen back towards her. Suddenly, a wail erupted from the young officer nearby. I subconsciously turned to look, only to see the young man from earlier clutching his shin, rubbing it to ease the pain. Bai Ningbing retracted the leg she had kicked out, closed the marriage certificate, and stuffed it into my hand. Put this away properly. Don't take it out for no reason. Another officer trotted over and handed a receipt to Bai Ningbing. She then stuffed the receipt into my hand too. License suspended, fine 1,200. Blinking innocently, I looked at her. No need for detention or anything. Bai Ningbing stood straight, meeting my gaze directly, her dark pupils revealing a solemn and stern aura. I'm 176 centimeters tall, and Bai Ningbing is 173 centimeters, but in her heeled leather shoes, she was my height. Yet, in terms of presence, there was absolutely no comparison. Seeing my innocent, hurt expression, Bai Ningbing finally relented slightly. It wasn't serious enough for that. Go home. As I flusteredly gathered my things, my stupid self asked, has the fine been paid? Bai Ningbing nodded. Paid. Oh. A collective sound of teasing understanding rose from the male officers nearby. Bai Ningbing slowly turned her head towards them. The area fell instantly silent, and everyone uniformly lowered their heads. Following Bai Ningbing out of the traffic police department entrance, I turned back before leaving to give the officers a wave, departing breezily. Reaching the car, I placed my hand on the driver's door handle. A soft cough sounded behind me, and only then did I remember. My license had just been suspended. Shaking my head helplessly, I said, you head back to work. I'll call a designated driver. The words were barely out of my mouth when Bai Ningbing opened the driver's door and slid right in. Utterly dumbfounded, I stared at her blankly. Bai Ningbing shot me an annoyed glance. Get in. I quickly hurried over to the passenger side and got in. After fastening my seatbelt, the car pulled smoothly away from the station. It was exceptionally quiet inside. Back where there were more people, I could manage a few words, but now I had no idea what to talk about. I awkwardly fidgeted with my fingers. What got into you tonight? 2 seconds later, it finally clicked, and just as I was about to explain, I sighed instead. Haven't seen my wife in months. Been in a bad mood. My head was practically buried in my chest when someone suddenly tapped my arm, pushing me upright. I tensed up, straightening my posture, and glanced at Bai Ningbing beside me. She was focused on the road ahead, her gaze never once drifting toward me. Confused, I asked, what's up? Seatbelt. Her words were clipped, but I got the message. My seatbelt was crooked. After adjusting it, I looked at Bai Ningbing again. Still driving with rigid precision, her eyes never left the road, yet somehow she knew exactly what I was doing. I licked my lips. For a second there, I thought you were going to lecture me. We'd barely ever spent time alone together, but with just the two of us in the car now, the silence was painfully awkward. Street lights streamed through the window, casting a glow on half of Bai Ningbing's face, cold yet strikingly beautiful. Out of nowhere, she spoke. Why would I lecture you? I saw you kick your subordinate earlier, so I thought you were going to hit me. Bai Ningbing turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Are you my subordinate? There was a hint of mockery and resignation in her tone. For some reason around her, I always ended up acting insecure, and not just regular insecure, but the kind of stupid, cringe-inducing insecurity that even I couldn't stand. The only thing left to do was shut up. We arrived at the underground parking lot of our complex. After killing the engine, Bai Ningbing didn't get out. Before we got married, I told you, my job is unusual. I'm rarely home. You said you understood. I thought you actually got it. Maybe it was her profession, or maybe it was because she was my superior, but the way she said it made me feel like a student being scolded by the principal. I nodded. I know your job's different. Long hours, frequent business trips. Bai Ningbing leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, staring ahead with a resigned expression. I knew dragging this out wouldn't help, so I came clean. My parents were nagging me about having kids tonight. Got annoyed, so I went for a drive. A drive at 160 kilometers per hour. I hunched my shoulders. Won't happen again. Bai Ningbing seemed to let it go, opening the door and stepping out. We walked toward the house, one after the other. Once home, we retreated to our own rooms. Logically, two people living together without talking or interacting should feel awkward. But with Bai Ningbing, aside from the initial discomfort, I didn't feel any tension at all. After washing up, I headed to the kitchen for some warm water. There, I saw Bai Ningbing in the living room, adjusting her uniform and putting on her police cap. I froze. You're going out again? Her hair wasn't fully dry yet. I watched as she buttoned up her shirt. She glanced at me and nodded. Yeah, my turn for night shift. Seeing her pull on black socks, I couldn't bring myself to suggest she stay home. You never worked at the traffic police unit before, right? Lacing up her shoes, she replied. Just a temporary transfer. I'll be back at the station soon. With that, she gave me one last look, turned the doorknob, and left. I watched her figure disappear into the distance, soon replaced by the taillights of her car, until she was completely gone. Come to think of it, ever since we were kids, I've always been watching her back. In kindergarten, she comforted me when I cried. By third grade, she'd already skipped to middle school. When I started seventh grade, she was in a top-tier youth program. By the time I finished high school, she'd already graduated with a master's degree. Can you believe it? Too young, her parents made her pursue her doctorate, then join the selected civil servant program. By the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree, she had already completed 2 years of intensive training and was directly appointed as a Level 2 investigator. Aside from attending the same kindergarten, I could never keep up with her pace in studies. If our parents weren't family friends for generations, I probably would never have seen her in my life. No, wait, perhaps once during the spring festival. In my hazy memory, there was only her standout height, her devastatingly beautiful face, and her unattainable aloofness. I had always secretly admired her, but I knew it was impossible. It wasn't until I became her husband that I realized it wasn't a dream. It's just that, as a married couple, we're worse off than roommates sharing rent. The next day was the weekend, and my father-in-law asked me over for dinner. Only when I arrived at the Bai residence did I realize Bai Ningxue was also there. Bai Ningbing was excessively outstanding, leaving her peers far behind. Her younger sister, Bai Ningxue, however, was much more normal. Equally tall and beautiful, but not good at studying, not even reaching the average level. How would I know? I went through school with her normally from kindergarten all the way to graduating with our bachelor's degrees. I had the top score for university admission. She had the last. As soon as I arrived, she dragged me into a duo queue. Look at your sorry self. Hurry up and play support for me. I shook my head, refusing, resting my head lazily on the table to watch her play. Tell me, what kind of guys does your sister like? Hearing my question, Bai Ningxue laughed heartily. Don't worry, definitely not your type. I kicked her chair playfully. Get lost, talk properly. Click, the door was pushed open. Bai Ningbing made her grand entrance, radiating the aura of an ice queen. She wore a white shirt, her jacket draped over her arm. Taking off the jacket revealed an even more stunning figure, dazzling enough to make one unable to keep their eyes open. Hearing her, my mother-in-law took her jacket and pulled her into the living room. As soon as she entered, she scanned Bai Ningxue and me like a scanner. I immediately sat up straight. She glanced coolly at Bai Ningxue, then simply sat down opposite me. My father-in-law and mother-in-law continued their battle in the kitchen. I moved over next to her and poured her a glass of boiled water. You came too. Bai Ningbing glanced at me, picked up the glass, took a sip, and said nothing. Across from us, Bai Ningxue, enjoying the show, burst into merciless laughter. "Oh my God, I can't. This is hilarious. This is her house. Does she need a reason to come back? So awkward, I could dig a hole in the floor. I call my own parents mom and dad so often, I just realized I was at my in-laws' house, not my own. I don't know why, but I always end up saying thoughtless things in front of Bai Ningbing. Fortunately, I've embarrassed myself so many times it doesn't matter anymore." Pausing for a moment, I asked caringly, "Were you tired from being on duty yesterday? Maybe you should go rest for a bit." Bai Ningbing put down her glass, slowly relaxed her body, and leaned back against the sofa. Suddenly, a fair, delicate hand reached behind my neck and patted it gently twice. Then it slid down my back to rest on the sofa. The delicate touch instantly made my brain crash, leaving me frozen on the spot. "Call me when the food is ready." After saying that, Bai Ningbing closed her eyes, leaving me alone, sitting on pins and needles, heart pounding, face flushed red. After lunch, Bai Ningbing changed into her work clothes, ready to go back to work again. I followed behind her, watched her get into the car. Before she left, I stuffed a few warm tangerines into her hand. "I picked the female ones. They're very sweet. Eat them at work if you get thirsty." Bai Ningbing raised an eyebrow, looking at me with an unreadable expression. The scene became awkward for a moment. Bai Ningbing took the tangerines from my hand. The brief touch made my heart flutter again. "Go back inside." I nodded, about to turn and leave, when I suddenly remembered something. Just before she started the car, I said, "Find some time to rest." Bai Ningbing nodded, waving for me to go back into the house. Then the car gradually disappeared from view. Stood there, feeling a bit lost. "She's long gone, and you're still looking." Not until Bai Ningxue tossed a can of Coke over did I realize I had been standing there for a long time. She had come out looking for me. I popped the tab, took a sip, and sighed. I wasn't sure if I was asking her or myself. "Isn't it strange? Before, I rarely saw your sister. Just bumping into her occasionally felt satisfying and made me happy. Now we're married, see each other more often, even live under the same roof. But I feel it's not enough. I want to interact more with your sister, be closer." I turned to look at Bai Ningxue, who looked almost identical to Bai Ningbing. "Tell me, am I being too greedy?" Bai Ningxue looked me up and down with an expression of disdain, seemingly unable to comprehend my feelings. "You two are already registered. You're a couple, living under the same roof. What is it you want to do that isn't convenient?" After saying that, Bai Ningxue twisted open her Coke and took a gulp. "Also, my sister is indeed a bit cold, but she's not heartless. The fact that she agreed to register the marriage with you means she acknowledges you in her heart. It just takes time and the right opportunity to become closer." At this point, Bai Ningxue grinned mischievously. "Besides, that blockhead has never even dated. As long as you follow the guidance of me, the love guru, and seduce her appropriately, won't she be putty in your hands?" Hearing her say that, it actually seemed to make sense. I couldn't just wait for Bai Ningbing to take the initiative and approach me. But the approach needed careful handling. I understood the principle that going too far is as bad as not going far enough. The next day was Sunday. I cooked up a storm home. Packing up 4 dishes and a soup, I headed to the traffic police brigade with the lunch, which looked, smelled, and tasted great. I heard Bai Ningbing was due to be transferred back soon, but for this month, she was still at the traffic police brigade. I sent her a message beforehand to avoid a wasted trip. When I arrived at the entrance of the traffic police building, Bai Ningbing was surprisingly already waiting for me there. As I got out of the taxi, Bai Ningbing saw me carrying multiple bags and frowned slightly. "What's this about?" I held up the insulated bag for her to see. "I brought you lunch. I happen to be off today, so I made a few dishes and brought them over." I blurted it all out at once, giving her no chance to refuse. Bai Ningbing didn't say much, just told me to bring it to her office. Once in the office, Bai Ningbing finally asked, "Why the sudden idea to bring me lunch?" Looking at her cool and elegant face, I pretended to be calm and said naturally, "Dad said you're busy with work and just grab whatever for meals. I'm your husband. Of course I should care about you more." After hearing this, Bai Ningbing offered no extra words. "Just take care of yourself." Then she went to answer the phone, sign some papers and whatnot. She didn't seem to stop. Before long, she put on her hat, looking like she was heading out. I quickly called out, "Have a bite before you go." Bai Ningbing glanced at me. "No time. Share it with the others and eat it." I quickly turned around, opened the insulated container, packed some food into it, sealed it, and then chased after her. I caught up just as Bai Ningbing's car was about to leave. "Take it. Eat on the way." Bai Ningbing paused for a moment, but still took the lunchbox. Afterward, I called the others in the office to eat together. Several big guys ate with looks of pure bliss, praising my cooking skills nonstop. Then, they started gossiping about what Bai Ningbing was usually like at home. Cheeky guys. I treated them to lunch hoping to find out about Bai Ningbing's situation at work, but they started prying into my side of things first. However, the time spent at home after work was really too short. There wasn't much to tell. The young man I had kicked the night I was speeding laughed while eating. Brother-in-law sure is bold. You're the only one who dares call Chief Bai to eat when she's heading out on duty. If we did that, we'd have to write a self-criticism report when we got back. I exchanged information with the young guys, and we quickly became friends, even exchanging contact details and WeChat. When Bai Ningbing returned, she handed me the empty lunchbox. Opening it, I saw not only had she finished the food, but she had also washed it clean. With my initiative, our relationship was gradually making steady progress. One day, Bai Ningbing's colleague, who was also her best friend, was getting married and invited us as a couple. Wasn't this the perfect opportunity? Amidst the clinking glasses and toasts, I used the excuse that Bai Ningbing had just finished her shift, saying she couldn't drink. Then, I shamelessly boasted, "Tonight, I'm drinking for 10. Bai Ningbing sat quietly beside me, showing no intention of stopping me, just watching me calmly without a word. Gazing at Bai Ningbing beside me, wearing a dress for the first time, I felt possessed by Li Kuei, grabbing the Baijiu serving pitcher and drinking directly from it. In the heat of the drinking battle, the alcohol went to my head. I brazenly warned Bai Ningbing, "Wife, move away a bit. I'm afraid I won't be able to protect you when the melee starts later." Bai Ningbing pulled me, who was standing and shouting, back down, gripping the back of my neck and pressing me onto the chair. Meeting her stern gaze, my head instantly cleared. I shrank back and chuckled. "My bad, I'll keep my voice down." The corners of Bai Ningbing's mouth lifted slightly, but she didn't say another word. After that, I politely accepted challenges from all sides. Before the second round even started, I was completely out of it. After all, at a drinking table, the type they fear least is someone like me, the loudmouth challenging everyone. Without a word, Bai Ningbing took my glass, clinked it with those who came to toast, and downed it in one gulp. Her powerful presence made the others retreat after finishing their toasts. However, some from other tables were bolder, spurred on perhaps by Bai Ningbing's image as a cool, reserved beauty. Roughly calculating, she must have drunk about half a liter of Baijiu. If the bride, her best friend, hadn't intervened, she probably would have kept drinking. As the one who started it all, my face burned with shame, and I didn't dare lift my head. Bai Ningbing patted my shoulder. "Yi Fan, are you still sober?" Just as I was about to reply, an idea struck me. Isn't this a great chance? Use the drunkenness to get close, maybe even go further. I pretended to be dazed, turned my head, and tried hard to focus my eyes on her. Then I leaned sideways, acting like I was about to fall right off the chair. Although Bai Ningbing had drunk quite a bit, she was still quick enough to catch me. Seeing me almost collapse onto the floor, Bai Ningbing put my arm around her neck, placed it over her other shoulder, and held it securely. I let myself slump against her, allowing her to drag me away. Just outside the private room door, Bai Ningbing seemed to find it inconvenient and hoisted me directly onto her back. It really proved the saying, a slim figure can hold great strength. I opened my eyes just a crack, peeking as Bai Ningbing got a hotel room in our names as husband and wife. She took me into the elevator and into the room. She wiped my face and loosened my clothes. Seizing the moment when she bent down to wipe my face, I pretended to have a drunken fit and hugged her. I called her wife. Bai Ningbing simply acknowledged it, surprisingly not pushing me away. After hugging for a while, I felt the time was right. Holding the back of her head, I slowly leaned my face closer. I could feel her breath quickening until we were just a centimeter apart, when Bai Ningbing suddenly turned her face away. She just gave me a simple hug. Leaning on her shoulder, I instantly sobered up. At the same time, I felt extremely disappointed. Stop your drunken act. After saying this, Bai Ningbing pushed me back onto the hotel bed. I quickly closed my eyes and lay down properly. Afterward, Bai Ningbing didn't lie down with me. From the sounds, it seemed like she made do on the sofa. She left before dawn. Still lying in bed, I couldn't understand why, for us, a married couple for over half a year, we hadn't even held hands. Can you believe this? But the immediate problem was, after being so forward last night, how could I face Bai Ningbing now? Her evasion. It left me mortified. As noon approached, I still hadn't recovered from last night's disappointment. Ring, my phone rang. My heart filled with both anticipation and fear. Picking it up, I saw it was a call from my boss at the company. It turned out the company needed me to go on a long business trip. My boss, afraid I might refuse, specifically emphasized the importance of this assignment and the reward for completing it. Little did he know, this assignment felt like a pardon to me. Otherwise, how I would face Bai Ningbing back home tonight was going to be a real issue. I quickly went home, packed my bags, and was on a plane in less than 2 hours. After getting off the plane, I transferred to a Greenskin train, then a long-distance bus, a rural bus, and finally, an ox cart. Along the way, I witnessed the changes from a big city to a remote village. My phone signal also went from 5G to 4G, then to 3G, and finally to no signal. After getting off the plane, I hesitated for a moment. I called home. Finally, looking at Bai Ningbing's number, I hesitated for a long time and didn't dial it. As husband and wife, I naturally should have informed her about my business trip, but coward that I was, I didn't dare face her directly. After what happened last night, Bai Ningbing most likely knew I was pretending to be drunk, and that I pretended to be drunk, planning to make improper advances towards her. Forget it, I didn't want to think about it. The more I thought, the more ashamed and uncomfortable I felt. I spent over half a month in a mountain village that didn't even have phone signal. The mission was completed successfully. Everything in the mountains was good. Clear waters, green mountains, blue skies, tranquil and warm, and kind-hearted people. The only downside was the lack of signal, completely cut off in the outside world. I imagined that if I really went missing here, the outside world might never even know. The night before I left, the simple villagers held a farewell feast for me. They called it a farewell feast, but it was actually all local homemade specialties. Mountain chicken, duck, and mutton, along with home-brewed sorghum wine. Although it didn't look like much, it was the tastiest and most heartwarming meal I'd ever had. It would have been even more harmonious if you disregarded the final scene where the villagers got me completely drunk. In that moment of tipsy lightheadedness, I thought back to that night at the hotel when I was also drunk. Memories of Bai Ningbing, bit by bit from childhood until now, flashed through my mind like a slideshow. She and I were ultimately people from two different worlds. This time, when I go back, I plan to confess to her. I'm not good enough for her. Let's just get a divorce. I remember a story. Before the Buddha's disciple Ananda became a monk, he saw a young woman on the road and fell deeply in love, unable to let go. The Buddha asked him, "How much do you love that young woman?" Ananda replied, "I wish to transform into a stone bridge, endure 500 years of wind, 500 years of sun, 500 years of rain, just hoping this young woman will walk across the bridge." I felt a sense of empathy. I didn't want to become shackles binding Bai Ningbing. Just for her to glance at me once in a crowd would be enough. Heavy rain, mudslide, sharp shouts woke me from my sleep. I was staying at the village chief's house. He asked me to look after his grandson and ran out to warn the others. The sky was still dark. I quickly got dressed, took his 5-year-old grandson by the hand, and waited anxiously inside the house. Seeing the water level rising rapidly, already approaching the house's threshold, I decisively pulled the little boy and ran towards the back mountain. Unexpectedly, not only was the rainy path slippery, but the ground itself was very loose. We had barely climbed a few meters up the mountain when the entire slope collapsed and slid down. Feeling tree trunks crashing towards us, I could only hug the little boy tightly as we rolled down together. Sliding down with the entire slope felt like riding a magic carpet. I couldn't just wait for death. If the earth beneath us gave way, the boy and I would be buried. As the landslide passed the nearest corner, I leaped outwards, pulling the boy with me. We then tumbled into a cave. Not far away, came the unsettling but fierce sounds of crashing and tearing. The cave entrance was also getting narrower. The village chief's grandson trembled in my arms. He cried until he was exhausted and fell asleep, only to wake up and continue crying. In a daze, unsure how much time had passed, a sliver of light came from the entrance. I struggled to open my eyes and tried to dig through the dirt to crawl out. After just a couple of tries, I knew it was impossible. As someone who usually works in an office, my pale and delicate hands were utterly incapable of digging my way out barehanded. Continuing to dig would only drain my energy faster. Outside, the sky darkened and then brightened again. I started running a fever, and the little boy stopped crying, not because he wasn't scared, but because he was too exhausted to cry. I guess we must have been swept far away by the landslide and mudslide. Exactly how far, no one knew. In the quiet cave, I thought about many things. I wondered if Bai Ningbing would grieve if I died, and how long it would take for her to marry someone else. Half a year? Or just 1 year? The thought of her forgetting me, signing a marriage certificate with someone else, and living under the same roof made my chest tighten. I wanted to cry, but all that came out was a hoarse sound. My throat was dry and aching. But maybe this was just fate. If Bai Ningbing cared about me, she would come looking for me, right? My consciousness grew hazy. In my daze, I felt Bai Ningbing descending like a divine savior, a rope tied around her. She took the nearly unconscious child from my arms. Then she came back down and carried me out. In her embrace, I felt safe, free to lean against her without restraint. If only this beautiful dream could last forever. I opened my eyes. The only thing above me was a fluorescent light on the ceiling. My whole body ached, and I couldn't muster even a shred of strength, as if every bone had been shattered. Struggling to move my fingers, I turned my head and saw long, jet-black hair, still beautiful despite being dotted with dried clumps of dirt. I reached out, trying to brush off one of those clumps. The woman beside the bed stirred instantly. Sitting up, it was my long-unseen wife, Bai Ningbing. A faint smile flickered across her exhausted face, but she quickly suppressed it. She touched my forehead, glanced at the monitor by the bed, then finally looked at me. "Don't move around. They say those who survive great calamities are blessed afterward. So why was I being scolded the moment I woke up? My heart ached, and I felt the urge to cry. Why are you yelling at me?" Bai Ningbing seemed momentarily flustered. She grabbed a tissue and wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes. "I'm not yelling. Just don't move, or the floor will back up." "How's the little boy?" I changed the subject. Bai Ningbing nodded. "He's fine, under observation in a regular ward." As she adjusted the foredrip, I reached out and held her fingers. Her movements paused briefly before she sat down and looked at me. I licked my dry lips. I thought I was going to die there. Bai Ningbing pinched my cheek with her other hand. "Yi Fan, you've got some nerve, running off to such a remote place without a word. If your mother hadn't called me in tears, you really might have stayed there for good." Her words only made me feel worse. "Before I left, I didn't dare message you. I was afraid you'd ignore me." Bai Ningbing looked at me, puzzled. Maybe someone like her only knew the annoyance of being pursued, not the feelings of the pursuer. Maybe she thought I was being melodramatic, but after surviving such an ordeal, I figured it was best to be honest, even if the consequence might be a clean break. I took a deep breath. "That night we drank, you wouldn't let me kiss you. I thought you were angry, so I didn't dare message you." Bai Ningbing's brows furrowed, her expression turning serious. It was the first time I'd seen her like this. She cupped my face with both hands. "Since when did I say I was angry or ignoring you?" With my face squished, I could barely speak. I shook my head slightly, mumbling, I guess." "You didn't." "Drop the I guess." Judging by her tone, she didn't seem to dislike me. I held her hand and kissed the back of it. Bai Ningbing jerked her hand back as if shocked. "Stop messing around." Pressing me down to lie still, Bai Ningbing instructed, "Don't move around, or your wound might reopen." "Why won't you let me kiss you? Do you hate me?" Since the cards were on the table, I dropped the act and said whatever came to mind. Bai Ningbing stood up, looking down at me, and replied coolly, "Are you done yet?" I struggled to sit halfway up, leaning against the hospital bed. "Don't change the subject. Do you not want to spend your life with me? What kind of marriage is this? Forget kissing. I haven't even held your hand." Bai Ningbing froze for a moment, then let out a soft sigh. Her face remained expressionless, as if it were incapable of showing any emotion. Yifan, I'm not a frivolous woman. If I hated you, I wouldn't have married you. If I hated you, I wouldn't have taken a helicopter the moment I got the call to come find you. She paused, turning to look out the window. Only when I saw you alive did I finally relax. I've never feared any criminal. I don't even know what fear feels like. But when I couldn't find you, her voice grew quieter. This was the first time she had ever spoken so much to me at once. Come to think of it, if she truly felt nothing for me, she wouldn't have married me. As the flower of the high peaks, her beauty and figure were perhaps the least remarkable among her many dazzling achievements. During the 2+ years she spent in closed-door training, our home gained a first-class merit plaque and a second-class merit plaque. Maybe I had never considered what kind of brutal experiences she had endured to become so cold toward everyone. But now, perhaps I understood. She wasn't cold, just bad at expressing herself. In this moment, I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. Bai Ningbing withdrew her gaze from the window and turned back to me. On our wedding night, and that other night, you were drunk. I'm 2 years older than you, with more life experience. I need to take care of you. I wanted to argue, but realized everything she said was true. I wanted to talk to you properly, when you were sober, not just when you were drunk. The fluorescent light illuminated Bai Ningbing's fair face as we silently locked eyes. Only by looking directly at her did I realize she not only had delicate skin, but also deep, bright eyes, like Lake Baikal under a moonlit night. And I was slowly sinking into those dark waters. Actually, I wasn't drunk that night. Seriously, give me a set of advanced math problems, and I could solve them all. The corners of Bai Ningbing's lips curled slightly, her eyes carrying a faint trace of amusement. No wonder people say eyes can speak. Prove. There exist infinitely many primes p such that p is identical to 1 mod 4. Bai Ningbing suddenly threw out a number theory problem, completely catching me off guard. I stared at her blankly. What did you say? She suppressed her smile. Yifan, I don't know how to flirt or talk about love, but... A pale hand grasped mine, its owner now staring intently at me. Once I make up my mind, I won't change it. Holding her hand, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. I could feel Bai Ningbing's warm breath. Suddenly, a force pushed me back. My blood pressure spiked. What are you? Bai Ningbing's ears turned red as she glanced at the heart monitor. Wait until your injuries heal. For the next 2 days, Bai Ningbing personally took care of me. Only when a city bureau called repeatedly did she finally pack up and leave. With her gone, there was no need for me to keep pretending to be a patient. Under my mother's disdainful gaze, I devoured 3 bowls of food at every meal and was discharged 3 days later. Those 3 days felt like an eternity. I remembered clearly what Bai Ningbing had said. Wait until my injuries healed. On the day I returned home, Bai Ningbing was away on a mission. Gazing at the empty room, the excitement and anticipation in my heart turned into a helpless sigh. I refused Mom's offer to stay and take care of me, quickly packing a few things. Ordered some takeout, then played a round of the game. After 1 round, I already felt bored. I remembered that online question, which is more important, your partner or games? The classic answer was, playing with your partner, playing games, partner games. Indeed, the emphasis is on the verb. After washing up, uncharacteristically, I grabbed my pillow and went to Bai Ningbing's room to sleep. Our girls' rooms usually this simple and tidy. A double bed, a desk lamp, a few books. That was it. But smelling the faint, fresh scent in the air, I suppose this counted as sharing a bed, didn't it? Drowsily, I sensed a figure moving beside me. Alarm bells instantly rang in my head. Had a burglar gotten in? I struggled to open my eyes. Sorry, did I wake you? Bai Ningbing was wrapped in a bath towel, tiny water droplets sliding from the tips of her still damp hair. Much of her usual capable, dashing aura was gone, replaced by the charm and tenderness fitting for a woman. I swallowed hard, not forgetting to remind her, you said you'd wait until I recovered from my injury. Bai Ningbing's ears reddened visibly as she reached out to turn off the light. I quickly raised my hand to stop her. Don't. We're practically an old married couple. A fierce battle seemed to rage in Bai Ningbing's mind before finally resolving into a single sentence. You're just recovering from a serious illness. Just lie still.